ध्यायेत् शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणीश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षातात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामच्युतव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्। Namo Ramana. We will commence the Friday evening Atma Vicharam by listening to Bhagavan's Upadesham. As we have been contemplating his Upadesham from this book, Ramana Answers Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950, a compilation of all the answers given by Bhagavan on the questions asked around Atma Vichara self-enquiry by many devotees. This compilation has been done by our founder president Sarada Natarajan ji, and we have been looking at the question and answers that has been asked about Atma Vicharam to Bhagavan between 1936 and 1950. After reading this week's question and answer, we will meditate upon it by Bhagavan's grace, and then have a 20 minutes Atma Vichara session. Following that, we will have our President Sarada Akka talking about Atma Vichara as it has been contemplated in Ramana Gita, which is a compilation of Ganapati Muni, wherein he has captured all the questions that were put to Bhagavan by many devotees on the subject of Atma Vichara and others in Ramana Gita in the form of a Sanskrit similar to Bhagavad Gita. After that, we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. In this week, we will, because this week's question is a continuation of the last week question and answer, we will read that and then meditate upon it and this week's question and answer. The devotee asks, I mean this, when I travel from Calcutta to Madras, I must know Madras so that I may not alight at an intermediate station out of ignorance. There are the signboards on the timetable to guide me in my travel. But what is the guide in my search for the self? To which Bhagavan had answered, it is all right for the journey. You know how far away you are from Madras. Can you tell me how far away you are from the self in order that you should seek it? Continuing on that line of thinking, the devotee asks, How can I know? The question is, how can I know that how far I am from the self? Then Bhagavan says, are you ever divorced from the self? Is it possible to be divorced? Are not all these alien to you and the self, the most intimate? Where should you go to gain the self? Is the question. To the question, how should I know? How can I know how far I am from the self? Bhagavan is asking a counter question, asking us to inquire. Because if we, as we looked at it at the last week, if we hold on to a thought, we are actually, or hold on to an idea or a concept, we seem to appear to be far away from the self. The only way for us to drop that idea is a counter question to inquire. Who is holding on to this thought? To whom is this? That is the way Bhagavan makes us realize that we are the self, the very self here and now. So here he is asking, are you ever divorced from the self? We feel very much that we are divorced from the self. We are far away from it. The reason is because of a concept that we are a limited entity, and then we have many grand idea about what the self could be, having read maybe more of confusions than clarity about what the self, and therefore we try to think that it may be this, it may be that. So Bhagavan is asking, are you divorced from the self? Is there anything that we can perceive without the presence of the self? Can we ever see anything without the eyes? It is like that. And if I am perceiving something, if I am seeing something, how far am I away from the self, from the eyes? It is only through the eyes that I am perceiving something. So when we only question, then we see that because our attention so strong, or because our reality is attributed so strongly to the object, we take it for granted the subject. So by only inquiring, like I am seeing a TV. So through what are you seeing the TV? Only then we can see that, oh, it is through my eyes. So the eyes is there. So it is only by inquiry the attention is brought back to that obvious thing, to that natural thing which is there, to which the attention was not given. So the Bhagavan is asking, are you ever divorced from the self? Is it possible to be divorced? That's the another thing. Like, can I see anything without the eyes? It's impossible. So, can I be divorced? Is the question. So, it can never be divorced. It is verily through the pure presence, which is verily through the pure existence, which is pure. Because of that I see everything else exists. It is because of that I am cognitive of everything else. So it is only through that all my experiences are being registered. However, I give a lot of importance to the object, to the thoughts, or to the physical objects which are appearing, whereas take it for granted that light through which I perceive everything else. So only when we ask, can I be divorced of it? Anything that I am cognitive of, within or without, it is only through the light of the self. It is only through the presence of the self. Therefore, Bhagavan goes on to say, the world objects don't say that they exist. It is you who say that they exist. So it is I who say that I am far away from the self. The self is not saying it, nor anything in the outside world is saying it. It is only that entity, and therefore that entity has to be questioned. Who is that? Who is making that statement? Only when we inquire that entity and turn to the source of it, that then we see that we are verily the self here and now. Therefore, the Zen Guru very clearly, beautifully says, it is very easy to reach the top of the mountain from the top. It's easy to reach the top of the mountain from the top. Obviously, if you are already there is nothing else one needs to do, or any movement from that position is only makes us come down or makes us feel we are down. If we remain still, knowing that we are already in the top of the mountain, that is the easiest path to take. However, we don't recognize that we are the self. We recognize ourselves. If we momently recognize we are the self, then we are at the top of the mountain. No effort is required. However, whenever we feel that we are not at the top of the mountain, that is, we are not the self, because of habit, identified with this limited frame, with these names and forms, with objects, or with thoughts and concepts, then Bhagavan asks us only to inquire, only to question that belief, that idea that we are holding on to. Is it real? To whom is it? And to that guy to whom that idea is appearing, who is that guy? Who am I? And when we question and turn our attention to the real source of the I, we see that we are already verily the self, and by holding on or by attending to any of these things, we seemingly to feel that we have fallen down. We seemingly feel we are at the bottom of the mountain. And Bhagavan, with his immense grace, has given us this vichara to remove that seeming idea, remove that false idea where we feel that we have fallen away, and here and now make us realize that we are verily the self. Here Bhagavan continues to say, are not all these alien to you and the self, the self, the most intimate, isn't it? All other things is movement away from the self, or seeming movement away from the self, or makes us feel that we have moved away from the self, if we give them a reality. So, Summa Iru is the right way to recognize that we are the self here and now, and therefore there is nothing that needs to be done. All the activities of this body, mind, and other things may continue to be there, but well within all, and the one who knows all of it, the self, is here and now free of it. Otherwise, all the activities that we have done, all the pain that we have, joy we have experienced in the waking, that should have bothered, or if it has touched the self, then it should have bothered the self in the sleep as well. We see here and now the pure consciousness, the pure presence that we are, is untouched by any of these activities. Therefore, Bhagavan is saying, is not all other things are alien to you. Are you aware of it? And Bhagavan is saying, you is referring to us as the self. And he is telling that everything else is alien to you. And You yourself is the most intimate truth. Actually, the self is only experiencing the self. It is unable to experience anything else here and now because there is nothing apart. So it is continuously experiencing itself, says Bhagavan here. Where should you go to gain the self? When that is realized, all effort is seen as a movement. Therefore, it is only called a realization, not an attainment. It is not self attainment, it is only a self realization. A realization of that I am the most intimate thing of myself, and I am always aware of myself, and all the activities, the seeming activities, are untouched, don't touch me, doesn't change me a bit. And when we recognize that, and then we leave all of the outside activity to continue as it had to continue, Bhagavan says the higher power makes it all happen. You cannot neither hold on to the activity nor divorce it. It will continue by that higher power. Having recognized that all of it happens automatically and the self is, I am the very self and I am totally untouched. And when we remain silent in our own pristine state, that then and there we experience the oneness of everything, that the self alone is real. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, with which alone we have come to this most direct path for the next 20 minutes, let us do Atma Vichara. In Atma Vichara, no matter how many thoughts come and whatever may be the nature of the thought, we recognize that these are by attending to it, we are seemingly moving away from the natural state of self. Therefore, we inquire to whom is this thought? Who am I? And cut back to the source of the I thought, the self that we are. And by repeated practice, Bhagavan assures that the mind will gain enough strength to remain at the source. The immense grace of Bhagavan, let us do Atma Vichara for the next 20 minutes. Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Morana, over to Sharda.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining is the self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self, manifest as Ramana, we are meditating on Bhagavan's teachings with the satsang on self-inquiry and having the practice session of self-inquiry, followed by Manana on Bhagavan's teachings as compiled by Ganapati Muni in the 18 chapters of Ramana Gita. We have completed 5 chapters, the Mananam on 5 chapters. The 5th chapter was Signs of the Heart. And in that, Bhagavan has told us extensively of his own accord. He tells us about the nature of the spiritual heart as different from the physical heart. That it is not on the left side, it is not a blood pumping organ, it is on the right side, and it is the source of everything. That it is the source of everything, Bhagavan repeats at different points in the chapter in different ways. He begins by saying it is the source, and again he goes on to say that it is the source in the middle of the chapter also. He gives us how, in a mystical manner, what happens in a mystical manner is explained by Bhagavan to us in this chapter. The mystical rise of consciousness to the brains, which is the mind center, which is also called Sahasrara, and from there spreading to the entire body. Now this heart center has been Bhagavan's unique experience, and Bhagavan talks about it in different places. He refers to it in the talks as well as in his life experience. And when he is asked about this heart center, he says, it is the experience here. It is my experience, he says. And it is also mentioned in a Malayalam text, an Agama text, and he gives a reference to an Upanishadic reference. And thirdly, he says, this experience is universal. The experience is universal because everyone feels the sense of I-ness. We say I by touching our heart center. With our right hand, we touch our chest and we say I. This is almost natural to everyone. And this is the reason why Bhagavan gives us this great clue. After warning us in the beginning of the chapter itself that thinking about it would be having a concept of it. Thinking about anything. If we are thinking about the self also, it is a concept of the self. We cannot have a thought of the self in the self. In self-awareness, in self-abidance, there would be no thought whatsoever. So it would be free of thoughts. It would be the fullness. It alone is, the self alone is. But any thought about the self or any other concept which is helpful for us in sadhana, like the location of the heart center, would only be a concept. Bhavana kriti varnanam. This is what Bhagavan tells us first. So that we understand that we are using these concepts, whichever the concepts they are, in order to free ourselves of all the concepts. Ultimately, we might ask, is not the question, who am I, also a thought? This question has been posed to Bhagavan, and Bhagavan has answered yes. So, but it is like that stick which is used to stir the funeral pyre. It is like the camphor fire. The camphor becomes the cause of the fire and it gets dissolved in the fire completely. Even so, the concept of the heart or the aham spurana. The heart and aham spurana, Bhagavan has in other places refer to them as being synonymous. Therefore, the aham spurana or the heart experience is the fulcrum or the center of all the manifest universe. This is what Bhagavan explains to us again and again in this chapter. He first says that the consciousness rises to the brain or the mind center, which is called Sahasrara, from there to the body. And if we take this bodily consciousness to be the only truth, if we limit ourselves there, we become samsari. Again, he says that everything in the world is dependent on this body consciousness. The whole world is dependent on this body consciousness. It is only when one has a body, when one thinks, I am the body, then one sees a world apart from the body. It is only when we limit ourselves that we see a limited world outside of us. So the concept of the world is dependent on the idea of the body. And the idea of the body, in turn, springs from and disappears into the spiritual heart. When does it disappear? It disappears in deep sleep. This is our daily experience. But Bhagavan also tells us in this chapter that it can disappear during any intense experience, like ati shoka, ati santosha, very, very great joy or sorrow or anger or if we faint, murcha, nidra, ati, santosha, shokha, avesha, bhaya, adivihi. So there are different times when we experience the self. However, Bhagavan also clarifies in this chapter to us that any experience of the self which is not a conscious abidance would only amount to a laya or a lull, where one doesn't even realize what is the source, what is the reason for this joy. We sleep every day, we wake up every day, we do not inquire into the reason for the joy in sleep. If we inquire, and if we inquire deeply, then according to Bhagavan's guidance, we understand that the joy of deep sleep is due to the absence of thought. It is due to the absence of identity. It is on account of the non-rising of the I thought as a specific identity, and because of that, the absence of thoughts. So, if we inquire, we realize that the happiness we experience is on account of absence of thoughts, which means that the thoughts actually don't add anything to our kitty. They do not add anything. They do not give us anything at all. They do not give us the happiness that we seek. On the contrary, they take away the happiness that we experience during deep sleep. But since that experience is accompanied by ignorance, we do not recognize the value of that experience. We do not recognize that it is on account of the absence of thoughts in deep sleep that we are blissful, and that we have experienced the self actually on account of the absence of thoughts, and because we have experienced the self, we are blissful. Whenever we experience the self alone, will we be blissful. The same is true if we have great joy also. Whenever we experience great joy, if we experience great joy, it would have followed some event, some pursuance of some desire, and the fulfillment of that desire might bring us great joy. And at that moment of great joy, because that intensity of the desire which took us to that point has ceased, because it is completed, it has reached its fulfillment, there would be no further thoughts. If we have a small desire, the fulfillment of that desire will hardly leave us with a small space of time before another desire arises. But if the desire is intense and the experience of happiness on account of its fulfillment is intense, it would leave us with a space after its fulfillment where no other desire arises. And in that space, we will experience the bliss of the self. However, if we do so, and many people may do so, without any recognition of the fact that it is on account of the silence that follows the joy that we are experiencing the bliss, that we are actually experiencing the self. This we do not know. Even when we know it, like Bhagavan has told us, and all of us know it, we all know it, but still it has not become an integral part of our consciousness. That the conscious merger into the self alone is the source of bliss. That nothing else can actually provide us with joy. This awareness we do not have because the experience of self also sometimes becomes a sort of a goal for us. We experience it intermittently if we experience it, and then we think that when I pursue self-inquiry, when I abide as the self, at that point of time I experience bliss. And then I come out of it, and then I do not experience bliss any longer. So we begin to identify with that experience. This is even when it is conscious. But Bhagavan is telling us that the source of all these experiences, the source of all the thoughts is the heart or the self. So a conscious merger has this advantage. The advantage over an unconscious merger is that we know this bliss is coming from the self. Once it has been experienced, there cannot be any doubt. That's why Bhagavan says that is called samadhi. So it has to be experienced consciously. However, conscious experience once will not be enough to give us steady self-abidance. So we have to get to steady self-abidance. What is the problem? What is the obstruction to our being steadily self-aware? If we ask ourselves this question, all of us have the answer, and it is probably the same answer. The answer is because on account of the wandering of the mind, on account of the rising of thoughts, on account of our inability to cut away the rising of thoughts, to altogether cut away the rising of thoughts, we are unable to steadily hold on to the self. If we experience the self also, if the mind emerges at the source also, it rises again. It rises again, and it moves towards objects in the form of desires. So there is a need, we all feel that need to control the mind. So in the next chapter, Bhagavan talks about mind control. This is, of course, a very, very significant chapter, a subject which is much talked about, much thought about, much meditated upon in the spiritual journey. The subject of mind control. Bhagavan talks about two aspects of sadhana in Upadesha Saram. He says Laya and Vinasha. Laya Vinashane Ubhaya Rodhane. He says even to control the mind, there are two options. One is to get it into Laya, that is a temporary quietude, a temporary lull. The other option is to destroy it altogether. The latter is required because layagatam punar bhavati. The mind which is controlled rises again. It doesn't finish the story there. It may appear to be controlled for a time. Then why at all seek control of the mind? Because if the mind is totally uncontrolled, how to turn it back towards the self? How to make it get into the silence, which alone is the doorway to the self? If it is all the time rambling, if it is agitated to make matters worse, how will we able to get it? How will we be able to get it back into its source? This is the question. So, mind control is suggested as a prelude to self inquiry. In order to be able to get the mind to do self inquiry, it's not suggested as an alternative to self inquiry, but as a prelude or as a starting point to get into the right mental attitude to do self inquiry. So, if we see the chapters here in Ramana Gita, we find after Science of the Heart, Bhagavan will tell us about mind control in the 6th chapter, and then he will go on to talk about self inquiry in the 7th chapter, directly about self inquiry. So, what all has happened in the first 4 chapters are the background given to us as to the importance of sadhana, the nature of the sadhana, the nature of self-abidance itself. Then what are the possible paths to that abidance? So these are the areas which have been covered. The background has been covered. We have been, and then the importance of self-abidance, the paramount duty. We have been told what is the paramount duty, what is the nature of the abidance of the self, and what are the paths to get to it. Then in the 5th chapter, we have been told about the spiritual heart. That is where actual practice has started. So spiritual heart, we can hold on to the spiritual heart in our inquiry by turning attention towards the location of the I, towards the source of the I in terms of the location of the I. Or in asking who am I, one may not be even thinking of any specific point or source. But if we are watching or trying to get back to the source, that becomes the Hridaya Vidya, where our attention is turned towards the source. Though it may be a concept, still what happens is that the focus turns away from the brain center or the Sahasrara, where too much of mentation happens, too many thoughts keep rising. So when one takes the attention back to the heart, one feels that there is a certain degree of quietude, of calmness. The disturbance through the rise, the turbulence of the mind comes down and it becomes relatively peaceful when one turns the attention, even in any rise of thoughts, when one asks for whom is this and tries to turn the attention of the I back to its source, then the turbulence of the mind comes down. It comes down automatically, even in this quest of whence am I. But if the mind still is very turbulent, then one can look at the means of mind control, which Bhagavan will tell us in the following chapter. And then there also Bhagavan will tell that such a mind, quietened by the breath control, has to be taken back to the source. And so it will be by His grace. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana.
Thank you, Akka. Aparasachit sukhavidashe yasyornimatram guhan yasyornimatram bhuvanam samastam guhahitam tam ramanam gabhiram Chintavihinam hridi chintayami Chintavihinam hridi chintayami Namo Narayana.
Namo Ramana Devi. Thank you.